Confirming visual. Requesting air support.
The static on the tactical channel sounded like gravel dragged across sheet metal. Sharp, broken, wrong. Every frequency inside the Joint Operations Center at Firebase Cartwright carried a different flavor of chaos that morning. Channel Alpha bled the sound of automatic fire echoing off granite walls 7,000 feet above sea level. Channel Bravo was a mess of garbled extraction coordinates and panicked breathing. And somewhere between the two, buried under layers of encrypted distortion, 3 United States Marines were dying on a ridge they were never supposed to reach. No one had given the order to hold that position. No one needed to. When your extraction window collapses and your only cover is a lip of basalt rock thinner than a car door, you hold whatever ground God left you. Because moving means dying faster. Corporal Reyes, Lance Corporal Dunnigan, and Sergeant Okada had been pinned for 47 minutes. Their ammunition was measured in magazines, not crates.
Negative movement. We are fixed.
2 out of 3 were bleeding. The ridge sat at an elevation of 9,200 feet in a mountain corridor where winds shifted every 90 seconds, and the only road leading to them ran through a valley that a hostile ambush had just turned into a kill box. That valley was supposed to belong to the extraction convoy. 12 kilometers south, a 6-vehicle Delta Force column sat wedged between rockslide debris and a sustained crossfire that pinned every tire to the dirt. The convoy commander, a man who had run corridors through 4 combat rotations without losing a vehicle.
The thermal signatures are moving. We have positive confirmation.
Engaging. Give us a 20 on the wind.
Keyed his radio and said what no one in the operations center wanted to hear. Negative movement. We are fixed. Say again, we are fixed. No timeline on breakout. Fixed. In military language, it meant paralyzed, unable to advance or retreat. When a convoy reports fixed, every contingency plan built around that convoy's movement collapses simultaneously. Air support recalculates. Medical timelines stretch. And for anyone waiting on the other end of that convoy's route, the word fixed translates to one thing: you are on your own. It meant the 3 Marines on that ridge had just lost their ride home.
Who is that?
I have no idea. She wasn't on the manifest.
Did anyone sign her in?
The operations center smelled like stale coffee and sweat-damp nylon. Banks of monitors glowed pale blue in the dim light, each one feeding a different slice of the same catastrophe. Drone feeds showed the valley choked with dust. Satellite overlays mapped the ridgeline in thermal smears. And at the center of it all, Brigadier General Marcus Eldridge stood with his arms folded and his jaw locked, watching the only option he had left become no option at all.
Agnead, I said, who cleared you?
I don't need your clearance, Bryce. Get out of my way.
The hostile fire was originating from an entrenched shooter on the opposite peak, nearly 3,870 meters from the Marine position. 3 Delta operators had already attempted the counter-sniper shot from auxiliary positions along the valley rim. 3 had failed. The wind alone made it a suicide calculation. gusting at 35 miles per hour through a corridor that funneled between granite faces like air through a broken pipe. The altitude thinned the air to the point where ballistic tables stopped being reliable and started being suggestions.
Not missing.
A
White.
woman with no file in the system had never solved this kind of problem before, or so they believed. She arrived on the last inbound helicopter, a lone figure stepping off the ramp before the rotors had fully cycled down.
Sir, the situation in the green zone has deteriorated rapidly. We need authorization to move the convoy immediately.
Medium build, shoulders defined under a worn tactical jacket, the color of sun-bleached sand. Brown hair pulled back in a braid so tight it looked painted against her skull. And in her hands, carried with the kind of easy precision that comes only from years of familiarity, a Chaytak M200 intervention chambered in .408. A rifle built for one purpose and one distance, and that distance started where most shooters stopped counting. Nobody at Firebase Cartwright had requested her. Nobody at Firebase Cartwright knew her name. Who the hell cleared her onto my bird? The voice belonged to Sergeant First Class Bryce Haldane, and it hit the tarmac before the rotor wash had finished pulling dust off the gravel pad. Haldane was Delta, 6'3", built like a man who had been tested in places the map forgot. His tactical vest was still caked with the grey powder of the Valley ambush, and the skin beneath his left eye was split from a piece of shrapnel that had kissed his cheekbone during the convoy's first contact. The woman did not look at him. She walked past the helicopter's tail rotor with the Chaytak braced against her shoulder, scanning the ridgeline to the north, the way a carpenter scans a frame for warped boards.
Bryce, she's not handling it. She's wearing it. Wearing it.
Quiet, efficient, already working. I said, "Who cleared you?" Haldane repeated, stepping into her path. She stopped, looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Her eyes were dark blue, the kind that looked almost grey in low light, and they carried the flat, undisturbed surface of still water. No flinch, no anger, no effort to explain. "Overwatch," she said. One word. Then she walked around him. Staff Sergeant Nolan Vickers, Haldane's second in command, caught up to him near the ammunition cache. Vickers was the quieter half of the team, the kind of operator who noticed things other people talked past. He had been watching the woman since the helicopter touched down, and something in the way she moved had tripped a wire in his gut he could not name. "She didn't check in with the TOS," Vickers said. "No badge, no unit patch, nothing in the personnel system. I ran her face through bats and got a blank return. Blank? Wiped. Not missing, wiped.
Okay.
Like somebody took a rag to her entire service record." Haldane keyed his radio to the operations center. "Cartwright Actual, this is Viper 6. I've got an unidentified female operator on the firebase claiming Overwatch assignment. No credentials, no file. Please advise." The response took 11 seconds, which in a combat operations center meant someone was making phone calls they did not want to make. "Viper 6, Cartwright Actual. Operator is authorized by JSOC Direct. Classification level exceeds this channel. She has the position. Acknowledge. Joint Special Operations Command." That meant the order came from so far above Haldane's pay grade that the air was thin up there too. He clicked off the radio and turned to Vickers with a look that was half disbelief, half contempt. JSOC sent a ghost with no file to cover a Tier 1 extraction. That's a Pentagon joke. If she misses the first round, Those 3 Marines on the ridge are done, and we become the follow-up casualty report. Behind them, 3 other Delta operators had gathered near the equipment cache, speaking in the low, clipped tones that special operations personnel use when they are processing a variable that does not fit the operational picture. Master Sergeant Keane, the team's senior enlisted, had his arms crossed and his face set in the expression of a man counting problems. No spotter listed. No support team manifested. She's solo on a counter-sniper mission at altitude against a dug-in position. JSOS either knows something we don't, or somebody lost a bet. Combat psychology recognizes a phenomenon called threat dismissal, the brain's tendency to reject unfamiliar capabilities in unfamiliar packages. When a team has spent years building their identity around being the best in the room, the arrival of an unknown operator who carries no rank, no unit affiliation, and no track record triggers a defensive response that has nothing to do with logic and everything to do with ego. Haldane's team was not dismissing her because they were cruel. They were dismissing her because accepting her competence meant accepting that the problem was beyond their own. Vickers said nothing for a moment. He was watching the woman again. She had set the Chaitak case on a flat section of rock and was unlatching it with movements so practiced they looked choreographed. The rifle emerged piece by piece, assembled without hesitation, bipod locked, scope seated, bolt cycled once to check the chamber. Every Delta operator on that firebase had spent years around weapons. They knew what comfort looked like. This was not comfort. This was something deeper. "Bryce," Vickers said quietly, "I've seen a lot of people handle long guns. She's not handling it. She's wearing it. The most dangerous thing about a good sniper is not the shot. Any decent marksman can learn to squeeze a trigger at distance. What separates competence from lethality is what happens inside the skull between the moment the scope settles and the moment the finger moves. It is the ability to read wind not as a number on a meter, but as a living thing. A creature with weight and mood and rhythm, pressing against the bullet's path the way a river presses against a bridge piling." Haldane had seen exactly 2 people in his career who could read wind by instinct instead of math. Both of them were dead. He was about to watch a third. "She's heading for the East Spur," Vickers said, binoculars up. The East Spur was a rock shelf jutting out from the mountainside at 9,300 feet, fully exposed to both the wind corridor and the enemy position. No cover, no concealment, no room for error. Every sniper on the firebase had rejected it because it offered no second chance. One shot from that position, and the shooter's location would be visible to every hostile eye in the valley. She was already climbing, alone. The mountain did not care who she was. It treated her the same way it treated everyone, with indifference designed to kill. The east spur of the Coram Ridge sat at 9,300 feet above sea level, a shelf of fractured basalt barely wide enough for a person to lie prone, without a shoulder hanging over the drop. The rock face behind it rose another 400 feet straight up, a wall of dark stone that blocked the morning sun and left the spur in permanent blue shadow. Frost clung to the cracks. The air was thin enough that 3 deep breaths left a metallic taste on the tongue, the body's quiet warning that oxygen was becoming a negotiation, not a guarantee. Mountain shooting at altitude changes everything a sniper learns at sea level. At 9,000 feet, the air is roughly 30% less dense than at the firing ranges where most ballistic data gets written. A bullet that drops 42 inches at 2,000 meters on a flat Texas range might drop 36 inches at the same distance up here. Not because gravity changes, but because thinner air creates less drag on the projectile. The problem is that every other variable gets worse. Wind becomes violent and unpredictable, channeled by rock faces into gusts that can shift a bullet 2 feet sideways in a single second. Temperature drops crater the performance of propellant charges, and the angle of the shot, firing across a valley from one peak to another, introduces a geometric correction that most ballistic computers handle poorly and most humans handle worse. She did not appear to care about any of it. The woman settled onto the spur belly first, the Chaitak already assembled and locked into its bipod. Her movements were minimal, controlled, the kind of economy that comes from having done the same thing so many times, the body stops asking the brain for permission. She adjusted the bipod legs by feel, pressing each one into a crack in the basalt until the rifle sat level without tremor. No spotter lay beside her. In conventional military doctrine, a sniper team is always 2 people, the shooter and the spotter. The spotter reads wind, calculates distance, watches for threats, confirms the target, and talks the shooter onto the point of aim. Working without a spotter at this distance was the ballistic equivalent of performing open surgery without a nurse. It was technically possible. It was also the kind of decision that gets people written up in after-action reports or eulogies. She reached into the left chest pocket of her jacket and pulled out a piece of paper so worn that the creases had turned white. A dope card, handwritten, rows of numbers laid out in blue ink on a grid that had been folded and unfolded so many times the paper felt like cloth. Dope cards are a sniper's private Bible.
Ghosts don't debrief, Nolan.
Pre-computed data for specific rifles, specific ammunition, specific conditions, range in meters, elevation clicks, windage adjustments, Coriolis correction, spin drift at distance. Every number on that card represented a shot she had already calculated, a scenario she had already lived in her mind before the trigger ever moved. If you have ever had someone talk about the way a veteran keeps an old tool, a wrench that belonged to a grandfather, a knife carried through a war, you understand the way she held that card. It was not nostalgia. It was the weight of every round that card had guided home. She placed it on the rock beside the rifle, anchored it with a pebble, and pressed her right eye to the scope. Through the glass, the far peak resolved into a mosaic of shadow and stone. The hostile shooter's position was tucked behind a natural rock barrier, a slab of granite angled at roughly 40 degrees that provided cover from direct fire below, but left a narrow lane of exposure from the east, the lane she was lying in. She could see the barrel of his weapon protruding from the gap, a thin dark line against lighter stone. At 3,870 meters, that barrel was barely wider than a human hair in her reticle. The wind was the real adversary. At this altitude, wind does not blow in straight lines. It swirls. Mountain corridors create what long-range shooters call rotor effect. The air hits a rock face and curls back on itself, creating pockets of turbulence that can push a bullet in one direction for the first 1,000 meters and the opposite direction for the next 1,000. Reading mountain wind is not mathematics.
Nobody knows who it was. Hot team bears.
It is interpretation. You watch the dust on the ridge lines. You watch the way grass bends at different elevations. You read the mirage through the scope, those shimmering heat waves that lean left or right, depending on what the air is doing between you and the target. She did all of this in silence, her breathing slowed to a rhythm so deliberate it was almost meditative. 4 seconds in, hold for 2, 4 seconds out. Down in the valley, the 3 Marines were running out of time, and they knew it. Corporal Reyes had taken a fragment through the left forearm and was applying his own tourniquet one-handed with the calm, mechanical focus of a man who had accepted the math. Sergeant Okada was on the radio, and her voice had gone flat. The tone that every combat veteran recognized as the sound of a person managing panic by refusing to feel it. Cartwright, this is Ridgeline. We are black on 762. I say again, black on rifle ammunition. Sidearms only. If that overwatch does not suppress the eastern shooter in the next 4 minutes, we will be overrun. How copy? 4 minutes. 240 seconds for a woman with no name to make a shot that 3 Delta operators had already declared impossible. The wind on the east spur hit her from the right at an angle she could feel through the jacket, pressing against her ribs like a hand trying to push her off the ledge. She held her breath, released it, let the crosshairs drift across the far peak until they found the shadow she was looking for. If you had been watching her from the Operations Center drone feed, what you would have seen in the last 11 seconds before the shot was nothing. No adjustment, no visible movement. Just a woman lying on cold rock with a rifle that cost more than most cars, staring through glass at a target nearly 2.5 miles away. Reading wind the way her ancestors read rivers, not as an obstacle, but as a current to ride. One shot, cold bore, and the rifle had not been fired in 7 years. The concussion of a .408 JTAC round leaving the barrel is not a sound you hear. It is a sound you feel. It enters the chest before it reaches the ears, a pressure wave that compresses the air for 10 feet in every direction and leaves a brief vacuum in its wake. A pocket of silence that lasts less than a heartbeat before the world rushes back in. She fired. The recoil drove the bipod legs 1/2 inch deeper into the basalt. A plume of grey dust kicked up from the spur and was snatched sideways by the wind before it reached shoulder height. The muzzle brake vented hot gas in a controlled burst that smelled like burnt copper and chemical accelerant. The bullet was already gone. .408 caliber. 419 grains of copper-jacketed tungsten moving at 2,950 feet per second at the muzzle. Within the first quarter second, it crossed the lip of the spur and entered the wind corridor between the 2 peaks. The air hit it from the right at 35 miles per hour, and the projectile began to drift. Not randomly, but in a curve she had already anticipated, already corrected for. The windage dialed into the scope before the trigger moved. At 1 second, the round was past 1,000 meters and beginning to drop. Gravity is patient. It does not care about velocity or trajectory, or the desperate arithmetic of a woman lying on a mountain. It pulls at the same rate regardless. And at this distance, a bullet that left the barrel aimed slightly upward was now bending downward in a long, invisible arc that would carry it to the far peak or into the valley floor, depending on whether the math was right. At 3 seconds, the round crossed the midpoint of the valley. The wind shifted, not dramatically, not enough to scatter the shot, but enough that a conventional calculation would have put the impact 8 inches left of center. She had not used a conventional calculation. What she had used was something that no ballistic computer could replicate, and no training program could teach. An intuitive correction built from thousands of rounds fired in conditions that textbooks said were beyond reliable engagement distance. The difference between a miss and a hit at this range was measured not in feet, but in fractions of degrees. Adjustments so small they existed in the space between conscious thought and muscle memory. At 6 seconds, the bullet struck, 3,870 meters from the muzzle of a rifle that had not been fired since its owner was declared dead. On the far peak, the entrenched shooter, who had pinned 3 Marines and frozen a Delta convoy, simply ceased to exist as a threat. One moment, his position was active. The next, it was silent. The thermal signature on the drone feed went from bright to ambient in a single frame. The tactical channel went mute. Not the controlled silence of operators waiting for confirmation. Not the disciplined quiet of a team holding for orders. This was the other kind. The kind that happens when a group of people who have spent their entire careers around violence witness something that exceeds the boundaries of what they believed was possible. 10 full seconds of dead air. Then the voice of Sergeant Okada from the ridge, cracked and shaking and halfway to a laugh that might have been a sob. Cartwright, ridgeline, eastern shooter is down. I say again, eastern shooter is down. We are moving. Firebase Cartwright erupted. Radio operators began cross-referencing extraction routes. The Delta convoy commander reported the ambush fire had ceased, the hostile shooters having lost their overwatch advantage the moment the peak position went silent. Vehicles were moving. Timelines were being rebuilt. In the operations center, General Eldridge had not moved. His arms were still folded. His jaw was still locked. But his eyes had changed. They were fixed on the drone feed showing the east spur, where a single figure lay motionless behind a rifle. And for the first time in 31 years of military service, he did not have a name to attach to the person who had just saved an operation. He keyed the command channel. Overwatch position, identify yourself, call sign and unit, immediately. She heard the order through the earpiece pressed against her left ear, and for a moment she did not answer, not because she was deciding what to say. She had known this moment was coming from the instant she boarded the helicopter at Bagram. You do not step back into a world that buried you without understanding that the ground will eventually ask for your name. The hesitation was something else. It was the weight of a call sign she had not spoken aloud in 7 years, pressing against the inside of her teeth, like a word in a language she had promised herself she would forget. The military uses call signs for a reason. In the chaos of combat, names are liabilities. They carry emotion, identity, history. A call sign strips all of that away and replaces it with function. Wraith was not a name she had chosen. It was a name her first team leader had assigned her during a joint exercise in 2015, after she had completed an infiltration lane so silently that the opposing force reported 0 contact, even though she had passed within arm's reach of 3 sentries. "You move like a wraith," he had said, and the call sign stuck the way call signs do. Not because it was clever, but because it was true. 7 years, That was how long ago a woman named Lieutenant Kira Voss had died on paper. The operation had a name: Cerberus 2018. A mountain corridor not unlike this one, 600 miles southeast, where a command cell of hostile fighters had embedded itself in a network of caves and was directing attacks on a supply route used by coalition medical convoys. 40 soldiers, most of them wounded in a mortar strike 2 days prior, were being transported through that corridor when the convoy came under coordinated fire from 3 elevated positions. The escort was overwhelmed in minutes. The wounded were trapped in vehicles that could not move forward and could not turn around. Command had no assets available. Air support was grounded by weather. The nearest quick reaction force was 4 hours out. What Command had was a single operator, forward deployed for a reconnaissance mission that had just been scrubbed, positioned on a ridge 3 kilometers from the ambush corridor with a rifle, a radio, and orders that no longer applied to a situation that no longer existed. She made a decision that no manual covers. Over 3 consecutive nights, moving between positions, she identified and eliminated every shooter in that command cell. One by one, in darkness, in silence. By the 3rd dawn, the corridor was clear. The 40 wounded soldiers were evacuated without a single additional casualty. In special operations culture, there is an unspoken tier of respect that exists above medals and above rank. It is reserved for operators who have done things that cannot be written in citation language. Things that the chain of command knows happened but can never officially acknowledge. These operators do not receive parades. They receive something rarer: silence. Their deeds become stories passed between units in mess halls and ready rooms, told in fragments, never attributed, always ending with the same phrase, and nobody knows who it was. Wraith had become one of those stories. An operator whose real name was known to fewer than a dozen people, and whose call sign was known to thousands, believed by most to be a myth. The after-action report was sealed before the ink dried. The Pentagon classified the entire operation and erased the operator's file from every accessible database. Not as punishment, as protection. The kind of skill she had demonstrated made her a target for every hostile intelligence service on 3 continents. The safest thing they could do for her was make her disappear. They listed her as killed in action, gave her a star on a wall that nobody outside a windowless room in Virginia would ever see. And Kira Voss, the woman, became Wraith, the ghost, a call sign attached to a classified file that most of the military's senior leadership had heard whispered about, but never confirmed. She had accepted it, not easily, not without cost. The cost was everything. A name erased meant a life erased. No contact with the unit she had served. No recognition ceremony. No flag folded and handed to a family that was told their daughter died in a training accident, in a place they were not allowed to know the name of. Her mother received a letter and a medal in a box, and Kira Voss watched the funeral from a satellite feed in a room that smelled like floor wax and old paper. That was the valley, the lowest point, the place where the story bends so far down you think it will break. But ghosts do not stay buried when the living need them. 3 weeks ago, a JSOC liaison had appeared at the door of a cabin in a part of Montana that did not appear on consumer maps. He carried a folder with a satellite image of a mountain range and a single sentence typed on a briefing sheet. 3 Marines, no other option. Will you go back? She had looked at the image for a long time. Then she had walked to the closet, pulled out a rifle case that had not been opened since the day they told her she was dead, and said, "When does the bird leave?" Now she lay on a spur of cold rock with the taste of cordite on her lips and a general's voice demanding the one thing she had spent 7 years trying to bury. Her call sign. She pressed the transmit button. Call sign, Wraith. The word left her mouth the way a stone leaves a hand, with finality, with the understanding that once released, it could not be taken back. For 7 years, that name had existed only in sealed files and the memories of people who had been ordered to forget. Now, it was loose on an open tactical frequency, traveling at the speed of light to every receiver in the operational network. In the operations center, the effect was immediate. Staff Sergeant Vickers was the first to react, and his reaction was not a word, but a sound, a sharp intake of breath that cut through the ambient noise of the operations center like a knife through fabric. He had been standing beside the communications bank when the call sign came through, and for a full 3 seconds, his body did not move. His brain was performing the kind of rapid cross-referencing that happens when something you were told was impossible suddenly announces itself as fact. Wraith, the operator from Cerberus, the ghost who saved 40 soldiers and then vanished so completely that her name became a legend, passed between units in whispers. Half believed, never confirmed, always disputed. "That's not possible," someone at the signals desk said. "Wraith is KIA, has been for 7 years." "Pull the file," General Eldridge said. His voice was calm, but he was standing now, both hands flat on the table in front of him, and the officers closest to him recognized the posture. It was the stance of a man who has just realized that the situation he is commanding has dimensions he did not account for. The intelligence officer at the classified terminal typed for 9 seconds. What appeared on screen made the room go quiet. Operation Cerberus. Classification level, top secret, special access program. Operational summary, redacted. Casualty report, redacted. Operator profile. And then a photograph that had been taken 8 years ago, showing a woman in desert camouflage with dark brown hair pulled back in a braid. Dark blue eyes staring into the camera with the same flat, undisturbed expression that Haldane had seen on the tarmac 40 minutes earlier. Name: Voss, Kira A. Rank, at time of classification. First Lieutenant, United States Army. Current status: killed in action, declared posthumously. Decorations: classified. Operational history: classified. The only line that was not redacted was the call sign field, and it contained a single word: Wraith. The intelligence officer scrolled further. Beneath the profile was a list of operational engagements, each one a black bar of redacted text followed by a date. 7 entries, 7 operations across 4 countries over a 3-year period, every one of them classified at a level that required presidential authorization to unseal. The history of women in special operations and classified combat roles had always been written in invisible ink. Operators like Voss served in capacities the Department of Defense would not publicly confirm for years, if ever. Their contributions existed in sealed vaults, and their sacrifices were honored in rooms with no windows. "She's alive," the intelligence officer said, and the way he said it carried the weight of a man reading his own assumptions, their funeral rites. General Eldridge picked up the command handset. For the first time since the operation began, he did not delegate. All stations, this is Cartwright 6 Actual. The Overwatch operator is confirmed. Classification protocols are now in effect for this channel. No names, no details. Call sign only. Acknowledge. One by one, the stations acknowledged. On the firebase perimeter, Sergeant First Class Bryce Haldane heard the confirmation come through his earpiece and felt something happen inside his chest that he had not expected. Not shame exactly. Something older than shame. Something closer to the feeling you get when you realize that the person you dismissed is the reason you are breathing. Cerberus, 2018. 40 wounded soldiers evacuated from a mountain corridor after a lone operator cleared the threat over 3 nights. Haldane had been 26 years old and 3 weeks out of surgery when that convoy moved. A mortar fragment had torn through his left thigh and nicked the femoral artery. And the field surgeon who saved him had done it with a headlamp and a pair of hemostats in the back of an armored vehicle that smelled like diesel and blood. He was one of the 40. He had spent years wondering who the operator was, asking questions that hit classification walls so high he stopped climbing. The official story was that an air asset had cleared the corridor. There was no air asset. There was a woman with a rifle and 3 nights of darkness. He keyed a private channel, the one reserved for direct operator-to-operator communication, encrypted, unmonitored, the closest thing the military has to a confessional. Wraith, this is Viper 6, private channel. 3 seconds of silence. Then her voice, still calm, still carrying the stillness of deep water. Go ahead, Viper 6. I owe you something that a radio cannot carry, but I will try. He paused. The wind on the firebase pushed against his face, and he let it. Cerberus. I was one of the 40. Left thigh, femoral nick, 3rd vehicle from the rear. The field surgeon kept me alive with a headlamp and hemostats while rounds were hitting the hull 6 inches above his head. I spent 6 years trying to find out who cleared that corridor. Sent formal requests up the chain. Hit classification walls so high I stopped climbing. They told me it was an airstrike. I knew it wasn't. Airstrikes don't leave single-round entry wounds at elevation. Airstrikes don't discriminate between a command cell and the rock face around it, with surgical precision over 3 consecutive nights. Whoever cleared that corridor did it alone, in the dark, with a rifle, and I have carried that debt every day since. Through the history of elite military operations, there have been moments when the most decorated soldiers in the world paused and admitted they were standing in the shadow of someone greater. It does not happen in ceremonies. It does not happen in front of cameras. It happens on encrypted channels at 9,000 feet, in sentences that no one else will ever hear. I called you a Pentagon joke on the tarmac, Haldane said. I was wrong, and I apologize. Not because of rank, not because of Cerberus, because I should have known better than to judge a shooter by anything other than the shot. The private channel held silence for 5 seconds. Apology accepted, Viper 6, she said. Now get your convoy moving. Those Marines need a ride home. Below the firebase, the Delta vehicles were already in motion. The hostile ambush had collapsed the moment the Overwatch position on the far peak went silent. A single shot unraveling an entire tactical network, like pulling one thread from a web and watching it dissolve. The convoy pushed north through the valley, dust plumes rising behind armor plate, and 12 minutes later, the lead vehicle crested the ridge where 3 Marines were waiting behind a lip of basalt. with empty rifles and full hearts. Corporal Reyes was loaded onto the second vehicle with his tourniquet still in place. The medic who cut away his sleeve found the fragment had entered through the lateral forearm and exited clean, a through and through that missed the radial artery by less than a centimeter. Reyes watched the medic work and said nothing. He had spent 47 minutes on a ridge with no ammunition and no extraction. And the thing he could not stop thinking about was the sound that single shot had made rolling across the valley, a crack so distant it arrived as an echo of an echo, followed by silence, followed by everything changing.
Marines were dying on a ridge.
Lance Corporal Dunnigan walked under his own power, limping but upright, his right boot dark with blood from a shrapnel wound in the calf that he had not mentioned on the radio because mentioning it would not have changed anything. Sergeant Okada was the last to leave the ridge, and before she climbed into the vehicle, she stopped and looked east, toward the spur where a single figure still lay behind a rifle 2.5 miles away, visible only as a dark smear against grey rock. "Who is that?" Okada asked. The Delta operator beside her shook his head. "Nobody you're allowed to know." The extraction was complete. The 3 Marines were alive. The convoy was moving south, and in the operations center, General Eldridge did something that had not been done on an active tactical channel during a live operation in the entire history of Firebase Cartwright. He authorized an open broadcast. 0917 hours. Firebase Cartwright. All channels open. The operations center had settled into the tense, organized quiet that follows a successful extraction. The phase where adrenaline has not yet drained, but the worst possible outcomes have been removed from the table.
His last option becoming
Radio operators were logging final coordinates. Medical teams at the forward aid station were prepping for the convoy's arrival. The intelligence officer had locked the classified terminal and was staring at the blank screen, as if the photograph of Kira Voss was still burned into the glass. General Eldridge held the command handset for a full 8 seconds before he pressed transmit. In a career that spanned 3 decades, 4 theaters of operation, and more combat decisions than he could inventory without a filing cabinet, he had never used an open tactical channel for a personal message during a live operation. Doctrine prohibited it. Protocol forbade it. Every regulation he had ever memorized argued against it. He pressed the button. All stations, all stations. This is Cartwright 6 Actual. Open broadcast follows. Every radio on the network went silent. Every operator, every Marine, every signals technician, every medic within range of a tactical receiver heard what came next.
Nobody knew her
To the
name.
operator on the east spur, callsign Wraith. He paused, not for effect, for honesty. 7 years ago, this command made a decision to erase you in order to protect you. That decision was correct by every measure available at the time, but there are costs that do not appear in operational assessments and debts that are not recorded in classified files. Today, you answered a call that should not have been yours to answer, from a world that told you it no longer existed. You made a shot that 3 of our best declared impossible, from a position that offered no second chance,
Overwatch.
with a rifle that had not spoken in 7 years. 3 Marines are alive because of it. A Delta convoy is moving because of it, and every person on this channel is breathing a little easier because of it.
White.
The wind outside the operations center pushed against the walls, and inside, no one moved. "Welcome back, Wraith," the general said. "The field felt your absence, and it will remember your return." The channel held silence for 4 seconds. Then, one by one, acknowledgements began to come through. Short, professional, but each one carrying a weight that protocol could not contain. Viper 6, copy. Ridgeline, copy. Thank you. Convoy actual, copy all. Overwatch 2, copy. On the east spur, 9,300 feet above the valley floor, Kira Voss listened to the voices fill her earpiece and did not respond. She had already begun disassembling the Chaitak. Bipod first, folded and secured. Scope detached with a quarter turn and placed in its padded slot. Bolt removed, inspected once, slid into the foam cutout beside the barrel. The dope card, that yellowed piece of paper that carried the handwriting of a woman who no longer officially existed, was folded twice along its original creases and returned to the left chest pocket of her jacket, over her heart, where it had lived for 11 years. She closed the case, latched it, stood. The mountain was indifferent. The wind pressed against her braid and jacket with the same force it had used an hour ago, when she was calculating projectile drift across a valley that wanted to swallow bullets whole. The rock beneath her boots was the same fractured basalt, cold and grey and utterly unimpressed by what had happened on its surface. Below, the fire base was alive with movement. Vehicles repositioning, personnel crossing between structures, the organized chaos of an operation transitioning from crisis to recovery. She could see the medical tent from here, a pale rectangle of canvas against dark ground, and she knew that within the hour, Corporal Reyes would be on a table, under lights that hummed, and a surgeon would be examining the fragment wound in his forearm. With the quiet confidence of someone who saves limbs for a living. She did not go to the medical tent. She did not go to the operations center. She did not report to the general who had just spoken her call sign to every radio on the mountain. The helicopter was waiting on the gravel pad with its rotors turning. The same bird that had brought her in less than 2 hours ago. The crew chief saw her approaching and said nothing. He had been briefed with exactly 4 words. She leaves when ready. In field operations, there is a protocol for everything. Debriefing, equipment accountability, after-action reporting, medical screening. Every one of those protocols assumed the operator would still be present when the dust settled. Whoever had authorized her mission had also authorized her exit. And the authorization carried a single condition: no delay. Kira Voss climbed aboard, set the rifle case across her knees, and pulled the headset over her ears. The rotors increased pitch. The skids lifted. The gravel pad shrank beneath her, and the fire base became a pattern of squares and lines, and the mountain became a shape, and the valley became a shadow between shapes. She did not look back. Sergeant First Class Haldane was standing on the firebase perimeter when the helicopter banked south. He watched it until it was a dark speck against a sky the color of cold steel. And then he watched the space where it had been for a while longer. Vickers walked up beside him. "She didn't even stay for debrief," Vickers said. Haldane shook his head. "Ghosts don't debrief, Nolan. They don't collect medals. They don't wait for thank yous. They do the thing nobody else can do, and then they go back to not existing. That doesn't seem fair." "It's not. But she didn't come back for fair. She came back because 3 people were going to die if she didn't." The wind moved across the firebase and carried nothing with it. No sound of rotors, no echo of a call sign, just the mountain and the silence and the space where a ghost had been. If you know someone who served, someone who came home carrying things they cannot put down, someone whose sacrifice lives in the quiet spaces between what they say and what they do not, tag them in the comments. Not for thanks, for witness. The south sky was empty now. The only proof she had been there was a single brass casing on the east spur, still warm, rolling slowly in the wind until it caught in a crack in the basalt and went still. Somewhere below the clouds, a helicopter flew south, and a woman who did not exist held a rifle case in her lap and watched the mountains fall away. And she did not cry, and she did not smile, and she did not think about the word the general had said on an open channel that every soldier on the mountain had heard. Welcome back. Some people come back from war. Some people never leave. And some people were never there at all, except when it mattered.
Sniper's private Bible.
The brass casing cooled. The wind carried on. The mountain kept its silence. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if it reminded you of someone, or something, or a feeling you have carried without knowing its name, then you already know what comes next. We have another story waiting. Another name the world forgot. Another ghost who answered when the call came. Hit subscribe, ring that bell, and be here when we tell it. Because stories like this do not stay quiet for long, and neither should the people who lived them.